You are carrying a quiet, crushing exhaustion. No matter how much you sacrifice, the moment you set a single boundary, you are labeled selfish, arrogant, and cruel. You bend over backward trying to prove you are a good person, yet you are always cast as the enemy. They have weaponized your own morality against you. They know that as long as you are terrified of being the bad guy, they hold the leash to your mind, your energy, and your life. If you are finally ready to stop suffering, for people who secretly want you to fail, do not move. Today, we are opening Carl Jung's darkest psychological insight to grant you the one permission you have always needed, the absolute right to become the villain. That line is not poetry. It is a blade. Carl Jung was exposing the central fraud of your life. You were trained to worship goodness, even when goodness was being used as a prison. You were taught that being misunderstood is a tragedy. You were taught that being disliked is a failure. You were taught that if someone calls you selfish, cold, or cruel, you must rush to clear your name. But toxic people do not accuse you because you are guilty. They accuse you because accusation keeps you negotiating. It keeps you apologizing. It keeps you standing in a courtroom they control, begging hostile people to revise a verdict they never intended to change. This is the forbidden question you were never allowed to ask. What if the only way to escape their psychological prison is to happily accept the role of the monster they claim you are? What if your deepest fear is the lock, and their entire strategy depends on you never touching it? What if radical freedom begins the moment you stop defending your innocence to people who profit from your guilt? That is the dark architecture underneath people-pleaser psychology. Your enemies do not need to defeat you physically. They only need to convince you that your reputation in their eyes matters more than your peace. They only need to trigger your old terror of tribal rejection. They only need to whisper the words selfish, difficult, unstable, ungrateful, and watch you abandon your boundary just to prove you are not what they said. That is not morality. That is mind control. In this video, you are going to learn why the family scapegoat is often the most psychologically awake person in the room. Why dark psychology always attacks your self-image before it attacks your choices. Why Carl Jung's shadow work is the missing weapon in narcissistic abuse recovery. And why ego death is not collapse, but liberation. You are going to see why the burden of goodness has made you weak. And why psychological sovereignty begins when you stop asking toxic people for moral permission to exist. By the end, you will understand how to let them talk, how to stop clearing your name, how to use the yes and strategy without losing your center, and how to become so internally sovereign that their words can no longer touch your nervous system. You will not become cruel. You will become ungovernable by guilt. You will not become evil. You will become whole. And when they finally call you the villain, you will smile, because you will know what that word really means. Inaccessible. If these ideas resonate with you, hit that subscribe button for more top-tier content. Also, drop a "Be the Villain" in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. Your desire to be seen as good is the exact chain keeping you in hell. That is the sentence most people spend years avoiding. You do not suffer only because others are manipulative. You suffer because their manipulation found the perfect handle inside you. They discovered that your self-worth is still partially outsourced. They discovered that one accusation can make you doubt your own reality. If they smear you, you will over-explain. If they withdraw, you will chase. If they look wounded, you will betray yourself to comfort them. This is not random. This is dark psychology operating through your conscience. People-pleaser psychology always sounds noble from the inside. You tell yourself you are being patient, understanding, mature, compassionate. But look at the results. You are exhausted, you are resentful, You are anxious before every text, every family gathering, every meeting, every shift in tone. You are constantly preparing a defense for crimes you did not commit. That is not virtue, that is conditioning. The people who demand your endless empathy have none to offer in return. You know this already. You have felt it in your body. You have watched how your nuance is met with distortion, how your generosity becomes expectation, how your silence is interpreted as consent, and how your smallest act of self-protection is treated like betrayal. You keep thinking one more explanation will fix it, one more conversation, one more chance, one more demonstration that you are not the person they say you are. But every attempt to clear your name only strengthens their power, because it confirms the one fact they care about most. You still need their verdict. That is why they accuse you the moment you set a boundary, not because the boundary is wrong, because the boundary exposes the relationship. A healthy person may dislike a boundary, but they adjust. A manipulative person experiences a boundary as a threat to their access, so they reach for the oldest weapon in the book. They attack your identity. They do not argue with the limit, they redefine the limiter. Suddenly, you are cold. Suddenly, you are selfish. Suddenly, you have changed. Suddenly, you are difficult. The message is clear. Abandon your line or lose your innocence. This is how the moral leash works. You are not controlled through force. You are controlled through image management. You are kept in line by your fear of being seen as bad. You are not obeying them. You are obeying the panic that rises when disapproval gets close. Carl Jung's shadow work matters because Jung understood what polite culture denies. There is no such thing as a harmless human being. There are only integrated people and disowned people. When you repress your aggression, your refusal, your selfishness, your anger, your capacity to disappoint, you do not become saintly. You become usable. Your so-called goodness becomes porous. Anyone with enough confidence can walk straight through it. And this is why your life feels so expensive. You are trying to maintain a spotless self-image in a world full of people who benefit from staining it. You are spending your nervous system defending a character that was never going to save you. You were taught that if you remained good enough, patient enough, pure enough, everyone would finally understand your heart. But reality does not reward purity. Reality rewards integration. Reality respects people who can say no without apologizing for existing. But understanding that you are leashed by goodness is only the beginning. The real trap becomes visible when you realize why toxic systems need one person to carry the blame. If you grew up as the family scapegoat or became the fixer in a chaotic system, you were assigned a role long before you understood the game. The family scapegoat is not always the weakest person. Often, the family scapegoat is the person with the clearest eyes, the one who notices the contradiction, the one who refuses the silent contract, the one who cannot fully numb themselves to dysfunction. And because systems protect themselves, the person who sees the truth becomes dangerous. So the system relocates its rot onto that person. Your sensitivity becomes instability. Your boundary becomes disrespect. Your memory becomes drama. Your pain becomes proof that you are the problem. This is why narcissistic abuse recovery feels so disorienting. You are not just healing from what happened, you are healing from what was made to mean. You were not only hurt, you were interpreted. Every reaction you had to mistreatment was reframed as evidence of your defectiveness. You cried, so you were unstable. You protested, so you were aggressive. You withdrew, so you were heartless. You complied, so your compliance was taken for granted. There was no correct move because the role had already been assigned. Let them paint you as the monster. A monster is free, a saint is a slave. That line sounds dangerous until you understand what it means. It does not mean become abusive. It means stop making your life dependent on the approval of people who require your submission. It means recognize that your reputation inside a toxic system is often a hostage, not a mirror. It means understand that the family scapegoat can spend 20 years being excellent and still be called impossible the moment they stop absorbing everyone else's emotional debt. And this does not happen only in families. It happens in friend groups, offices, marriages, communities, religious environments. Every dysfunctional structure has an appetite for a designated problem. Someone has to hold the shadow of the group so everyone else can feel pure. Someone has to be framed as the unstable one so the unstable system can avoid seeing itself. This is one of the ugliest mechanisms in dark psychology, the collective offloading of shame onto the person least willing to participate in the lie. If you try to defend your honor against a smear campaign, you will trigger the exact response they want. Why? Because your defense grants legitimacy to the tribunal. The moment you begin listing your sacrifices, your intentions, your receipts, your goodness, you accept the frame that your humanity is up for debate. And now the manipulator has won twice. First, they get to define the accusation. Second, they get to watch you exhaust yourself answering it. You keep hoping facts will save you. But smear campaigns are not built on facts. They are built on emotional contagion and selective narrative. The point is not truth. The point is atmosphere. In narcissistic abuse recovery, this is one of the most painful realizations. Some people are more committed to the role you play in their story than to the reality of who you are. They need you guilty because your guilt protects them from self-confrontation. They need you defensive because your defense keeps them superior. They need you trying because your effort proves they still own a corner of your mind. You are still hoping for closure. But closure in toxic systems is often a myth designed by the dependent mind. You imagine one final conversation where the truth is recognized, where your pain is understood, where your intentions are finally seen. But what if closure was never supposed to come from them? What if closure is simply the moment you stop requiring the guilty to certify your innocence? This is where Carl Jung's shadow work becomes more than self-awareness. It becomes a weapon against captivity. Because until you meet the part of yourself willing to be disliked, you will remain governable. Until you can survive misunderstanding, you will remain programmable. Until you can bear being misnamed, you will keep serving those who benefit from your fear. I'm about to show you Jung's specific move, and it begins where your old identity starts to crack. Carl Jung recognized that pure goodness is an illusion of the ego. Wholeness requires fangs. That is the rule polite society does not want you to hear. Your so-called good identity is often just the ego's attempt to remain lovable, acceptable, and morally untouchable. But the ego that must always look good is weak. It can be led anywhere by shame. It can be steered by accusation. It can be broken by slander. That is why ego death is so threatening, because ego death removes the false self that lives on approval. Carl Jung's shadow work asks a brutal question. What parts of yourself did you bury in order to remain acceptable? Your anger, your appetite, your refusal, your ambition, your contempt for being used, your desire to disappoint people who exploit you, your ability to say no and not soften it, your capacity to leave and not return. These are shadow elements, not because they are evil, but because your conditioning exiled them. And once they are exiled, other people sense it. They sense that you are over-invested in being perceived as kind. They sense that you do not want to be seen as selfish. They sense that you cannot tolerate being the villain in someone else's story. So they press there, they guilt you, they sigh, they distort, they accuse. They hint at your moral failure, and because your shadow is unintegrated, you panic. You rush to restore innocence. You hand them the leash yourself. If your peace of mind costs you your reputation with toxic people, pay it gladly. That is shadow permission. The permission to stop treating their disappointment like a sacred warning. The permission to stop assuming guilt every time someone is unhappy with your limits. The permission to let their narrative exist without organizing your life around correcting it. The permission to be misread by those who were never reading you honestly in the first place. People hear this and think it means becoming indifferent to everything. No, it means becoming selective. It means your conscience no longer answers to hostile authorities. It means you evaluate yourself by reality, not by accusation. It means your inner court is no longer outsourced to the loudest manipulator in the room. This is where psychological sovereignty begins. Not when everyone understands you, when you no longer collapse, because they do not. Psychological sovereignty means your center is internal. Your decisions are not constantly revised by guilt storms. Your boundaries are not provisional. Your self-respect does not evaporate because someone calls you mean. Their words may still hit your ears, but they no longer get voting rights in your identity. And yes, this feels like ego death. Because the old self was built around earning safety through goodness. The old self believed that if you could just be nice enough, useful enough, forgiving enough, everyone would finally stop punishing you. But that self was never safe. It was only compliant. Ego death is painful because you are not merely changing behavior, you are burying an old survival strategy. When you accept the role of the villain, you will experience something shocking. A death of guilt, not all at once, not dramatically, quietly. The old panic will rise, and for the first time you will not obey it. You will let someone misunderstand you and still go to sleep. You will set a boundary and survive their story about it. You will decline, detach, walk away, and discover that the sky does not fall. Their outrage will stop feeling like judgment and start feeling like withdrawal symptoms. But there is one identity that clings longer than all the others. The identity most likely to sabotage your freedom. The identity that has to end if you want real individuation. This is the most painful step, killing the savior within you. Not your kindness, not your humanity, the savior. The part of you that believes your worth comes from carrying what other adults refuse to carry themselves. The part that thinks if you just explain more gently, love more deeply, absorb more patiently, rescue more completely, things will finally become fair. The savior is not noble when it is compulsive. The savior is a trauma role. It is the old bargain. I will betray myself so no one can accuse me of failing them. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you, and you cannot heal while your identity still depends on being indispensable to broken systems. This is why people-pleaser psychology is so sticky. It does not only give you pain, it gives you purpose. It makes you feel morally superior, secretly central, tragically necessary. You become the regulator, the translator, the one who keeps everything from collapsing. But the cost is your life. Your relationships become rescue projects. Your boundaries become emergency exits nobody lets you use. Your own needs become a problem you never have time to solve. The savior is addicted to moral clarity. It needs to know it tried. It needs to know it was fair. It needs to know it was not the one who gave up too soon. And manipulators know this. They keep you trapped, not through love, but through ambiguity. Just enough hope, just enough guilt, just enough confusion, just enough pain mixed with responsibility. So you stay in the maze, trying to earn a clean conscience from people whose behavior guarantees you will never get one. This is where ego death becomes freedom instead of fear. You let the savior die. You let the fixer die. You let the family diplomat die. You let the over-explainer die. You let the perpetual defendant die. Not because you become careless, but because you become accurate. You are not responsible for managing another adult's immaturity. You are not obligated to translate your boundary into something painless for the person violating it. You are not required to stay available to prove you are kind. You are not morally superior because you tolerate disrespect for longer than necessary. You are simply trained. Carl Jung's shadow work is not about becoming darker for its own sake. It is about reclaiming the disowned strength required to separate. It is about integrating the part of you that can say with total calm, "Yes, I disappoint people when I stop abandoning myself, so be it." That sentence is terrifying until you realize it is the birth of psychological sovereignty, because once the savior dies, a new self emerges, a quieter self, a self that does not need to be the hero in every distorted story, a self that no longer confuses self-sacrifice with love, a self that can witness accusation without rushing into defense, a self that understands that in narcissistic abuse recovery, the greatest progress is often invisible, less explaining, less guilt, less panic, less need to be believed by those committed to misunderstanding you. And this is where most people hesitate. They understand the theory, they feel the truth, but when the accusation lands in real time, their mouth still opens, their fingers still hover over the keyboard, their body still wants to plead. So now we get practical. Watch how their power evaporates when you stop rejecting the label. This is the yes and strategy, not as sarcasm, not as manipulation, as liberation. Here is how it works. A toxic person says, "You've become selfish." The old you rushes in with evidence. The old you lists sacrifices, clarifies intentions, reopens the whole case. The sovereign you does something far more dangerous. You remove the friction. Yes, if protecting my peace looks selfish to you, then that is what it is. They say, "You think you're better than everyone now." You say, "If having boundaries reads that way to you, I can live with that." They say, "You're cold." You say, "I am less available than I used to be. That part is true." Do you see what happened? You did not confess to a lie. You refused to wrestle with the frame. You declined the invitation to moral trial. You accepted the social cost without surrendering the boundary. And because there is no panic, no frantic defense, no visible need to be exonerated, the accusation loses oxygen. This is the hidden power of yes and. It creates ego death in real time. The false self that needs to be seen as good cannot survive that response, but the integrated self can. The integrated self knows that a label from a hostile person is not revelation. It is pressure. And pressure does not deserve confession. It deserves composure. Let them paint you as the villain if that is the price of your release. Again, this is not about agreeing with slander in serious legal or professional matters. In those arenas, you document, you use proper channels, you protect your interests, and you stay factual. But in the emotional theater where manipulators thrive, yes and is devastating because it removes the performance they were counting on. They wanted you to flinch. They wanted you to scramble. They wanted proof that your self-image was still hostage. Instead, they meet a wall of acceptance. A wall is exhausting to argue with. This is especially powerful for the family scapegoat. Your role in the system depends on your resistance. The moment you stop fighting to be seen as good, the script starts malfunctioning. The family expects outrage, tears, pleading, one more explanation. Instead, they get stillness. They get a person who no longer worships acquittal. They get someone who understands that being the family scapegoat was never proof of defect. It was proof of function. You held what they would not face. And now you refuse the assignment. This is why dark psychology hates acceptance. Manipulation needs friction. It needs your nervous system to resist the label so it can drag you into defense. But if you can calmly survive being called selfish, cold, difficult, arrogant, or cruel by people who only liked you when you were useful, the game changes completely. They lose the button, they lose the hook, they lose the old access, and with that, psychological sovereignty stops being a concept and becomes a felt reality. You walk away from conversations earlier. You sleep after setting boundaries. You stop checking who believes what. You stop drafting imaginary opening statements in your head. You stop trying to win innocence in a theater built by people who profit from your shame. At the end of this process, something extraordinary happens. You realize you are no longer waiting for their permission to exist. And that is where the final transformation begins. At the end of this video, you step into the sovereign reality where their words literally cannot touch your nervous system. Not because they have become kinder, because you have become less penetrable. That is the destination of Carl Jung's shadow work when it is lived instead of admired. You stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. You stop pretending you are above anger, above refusal, above self-protection, above leaving. You integrate the parts of you that can bear conflict, survive misunderstanding, and disappoint people without collapsing into shame. That is wholeness. That is individuation. That is power. Psychological sovereignty is not loud. It does not posture. It does not need an audience. It does not obsess over revenge. It simply refuses occupation. The old you was colonized by opinions. The old you kept a running poll in your head. Are they upset? Do they think I'm wrong? Should I fix it? Should I soften? Should I explain? The sovereign you does not live under permanent referendum. You assess, you decide, you act, and you accept the cost. That is why psychological sovereignty feels so offensive to controlling people. They can tolerate your anger more easily than your self-possession. They can handle your tears if the tears keep you tethered. They can even handle your distance if the distance is dramatic and reactive. But calm non-compliance, calm acceptance of being the villain, that they cannot digest, because now there is nothing to negotiate with, no visible guilt, no open wound, no leash. And this is the real gift hidden inside narcissistic abuse recovery, not merely escape from one person, escape from the internal architecture that made you vulnerable to these dynamics in the first place. You stop needing universal approval. You stop overvaluing others' interpretations. You stop confusing accusation with truth. You stop worshipping your own goodness and start building your own solidity. Carl Jung's shadow work teaches you that the rejected parts of your personality are often carrying your missing freedom. Dark psychology teaches you how those rejected parts were used against you. People-pleaser psychology shows you the price of staying split. Ego death removes the false saint. Psychological sovereignty installs the sovereign, and once that process matures, being called the villain becomes almost amusing, because you finally understand the translation. Villain means unavailable. Villain means no longer compliant. Villain means no longer easy to shame. Villain means your boundaries have interrupted someone else's entitlement. Villain means you stopped volunteering for your own depletion. So yes, let them say it. Let them say you changed. Let them say you became cold. Let them say you think too highly of yourself. Let them say you are hard to reach, hard to influence, hard to guilt, hard to read. They are right. You changed. You became less edible. You became expensive. You became internally governed. You became whole. You began this as an anxious people-pleaser, terrified of being misunderstood or smeared by toxic people. Someone trapped by image. Someone trained to clear every accusation. Someone desperate to prove goodness, even to those who fed on your doubt. Now you can see the prison. You can see the moral leash. You can see the family scapegoat pattern. You can see why narcissistic abuse recovery requires more than insight. It requires identity change. It requires Carl Jung's shadow work. It requires ego death. It requires the death of the self that thought innocence in their eyes was the same thing as freedom. Now hear the final challenge. Relish their disapproval. Not because you are bitter, because their disapproval may be the cleanest evidence that your nervous system is no longer available for occupation. Enjoy the silence that follows when you stop defending your heart to those who only came to cross-examine it. Enjoy the space that opens when you stop rescuing people from the consequences of their own character. Enjoy the strange relief of no longer being the family scapegoat in your own mind. Enjoy the power of not correcting every false story. Enjoy the peace of being called selfish by people who were furious you stopped being useful. If you are ready for that freedom, comment "Be the villain." Type it as a declaration. Not that you will become cruel, that you are done being ruled by the fear of being misnamed. And subscribe if you are serious about this path, because most people will tell you to stay soft, stay likable, stay explainable, stay morally available to everyone. Very few will teach you what actually creates freedom: shadow integration, psychological sovereignty, strategic non-defense, and the courage to survive disapproval without surrendering yourself. This is for the people who are done begging hostile audiences for absolution, the people who are building internal authority, the people who would rather be whole than good. And do not stop here. The next video matters because once you stop fearing the villain label, a deeper problem appears: how to become unreadable to the people who used to control you. Watch the next one immediately and take the next step into a life where guilt no longer opens the door. See what others miss, know what others fear, become who others can't.